Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to explain the scope and meaning of comparative literature. First, history of and the development of comparative literature. The word comparative as descriptive of a critical method is used as early as the 17th century in regard to the study of law. The method itself, without the actual word, is as old as the Greeks. The method was revived with the revival of Greek studies at the Renaissance, and in the 18th century was commonly practiced in all fields of inquiry in history, in law, in science, in manners, and morals. In that century too, considerable work was done in comparative literature, for example, by Barrett, Barbier, and predecessors. The romantic passionates of the early 19th century, which restlessly pillaged the known and the unknown wars for ideas, renewed the comparative method with a richer sense. But while every other branch of study profited more and more by the comparative method, comparative literature, though it attracted more and more consideration as the century advanced, found itself mired in confusion as the century closed. Interest and activity had become increasingly widespread, but the idea remained ill-defined. Comparative literature remains still in the vagueness of its early stage. Almost every considerable university in the world has made provision comparative literature studies, but these studies are prosecuted usually under the most desultory type of organization. Based upon the early 18th century conception of parallelism, not upon a vital concern with the nature of the subject itself. The reason for such stagnation seems to lie fundamentally in a certain intellectual discredit into which fell both literature and criticism as a result of undue insistence. On the other hand, on the role of willing and by reaction on that of analysis and fact. As soon as in the 18th century, the naturalistic attitude came to feel itself strongly entrenched. The position of the arts in relation to personality and civilization began to be misunderstood. Mounting positivism refused to the arts any serious consideration as a medium of knowledge and dismissed them as a baubles, toys, idle amusements of an idle class in an idle hour. How comparative are viewed or perceived. The word comparative implies in itself an intellectual rational activity. For Professor Raleigh and his fellow impressionists, this fact alone will rule us out of court on the highly romantic ground that we are afraid to be caught alone with a form for a few minutes in any insulated spot. An interesting to be made is it sufficiently paradoxical, namely that the thorough-going positivists and the extreme impressionists have a complete aversion from all that is implied in the word explanation. And this for opposite reasons, the positivist, because he knows nothing except the individual fact and tends to be a statistician, the impressionist, the comparatiste has no such aversion. He turns away from all absolutes, leaving the absolute to the subjectivist. He plunges into the endless mobility of things, into the world of relations, into a universe of intellectual currents which weave and interweave their patterns on the loom of the generation, which act and interact which like rumor are broadcast and summer are receive and fertilize the local fields. Though like Chinook, they breed imperceptibly upon the from alien skies. The comparatist has no interest in contesting the affirmation of the uniqueness, the individuality of the world of art. The individual is the rule in the world of art as in the world of common sense. The individual is the rule. The individual is the rule in the world of art as in the world of common sense. The poetic imagination is an individual attribute undoubtedly, and the product of it has its own existence, depending upon the artist's individual picture of life. The poem is our in itself, autonomous, obedient to its own laws, subject to its own individual purposes, creative of its own delight. It is founded in the world of sense as all organisms are, but it takes on a form which no other organism can possess. We grow into it as we grow into the world which each of us knows and helps to make. The cachet of the individual is so impressed upon great art that it seemed as if criticism had no other function than the revelation of this individuality. The deeper meaning of literature as an art. Literature is not merely an imaginatively constructed picture of life in its actuality, but of life in its expression. Hence, literature is to some extent prophecy. The artist is always concerned with two questions. The first is what is what is beauty? The second is what is truth? Not truth as a scientific fact, which may or may not be truth, but truth as the artist sees it in the greater cycles, the cycles of equilibrium of which I spoke above. These questions have been answered, and therefore the interest of comparative literature is restricted largely to the diversity in the forms of grace in which artists in various national or linguistic groups present in varying materials their responses to these accepted answers. In what I have roughly termed the cycles of variability, on the other hand, it is these very questions which are at stake, and the artist ransacks every corner of the world, physical and of the world spiritual, in his search for the answer. Hence, the fields of inquiry become intensely complex for the comparatist, especially when this toy or material universe with which we have learned so well to play yields such amazing effects for our wonder and has multiplied so marvelously our means for the communication and diffusion of its surprises. The form of a work of art is its meaning, and its meaning is its form. It is this that makes the masterpiece an organism and gives to it the individuality and autonomousness of an organism. Criticism which rests satisfied with the isolated scene or the patch of color is meaningless and futile, for this make no picture. Physiology might as well talk of the organ without relation to its function. Next, art is the representation of the overflow of the residuum from human action, and it is in literature that we find the surest index to the progress of human thought and feeling. There is more than one way of knowing the world. The world. We cannot rightly use the phrase "know the world you live in" as if the world were entirely all extension of the physical. It is departmentalized nature of our activities and disciplines that are responsible, or this amputation and abdications. Man cannot be separated from himself in this way and remain whole any more than he can be whole in his isolation from activity. It is the function of comparative literature, I think, more than that of any other of the disciplines, to keep continually fresh in our minds the aspects of things which the thought of the cultural unit has submitted to reflection, and thus supply the synthesis which will make us truly a part of the world in which we live. All right, that's the presentation about the scope and meaning of comparative literature. Thank you.